Okay, just doing a quick sound check. People are still figuring out how to join the Hangout, so I'll give them a few more minutes. For anybody that's just joining, if you click on the showcase, there should be a little icon you can click that's a bunch of squares, and that'll show you what apps you can open. Showcase has a link for our chat room, and I'll go over that more later, but that's basically where you're going to get if something happens and you urgently need help. That's the place to click because I'm on a bit of a lag, but the chat room is not, and Jackie Castle is in there now, and I believe that Annalie will be joining us later, so there will be people that can help you there. Okay, might as well get started. I think everybody's managed to make it into the chat room. I'm just going to check on one last person who is having trouble. Let's see. Yep, okay. Looks like everybody should be in at this point. So hi, I'm Katie Cunningham, and I'm just making sure, okay, my sound's coming through. My name is Katie Cunningham, and I am a Python and Django developer for Speak Agent. We make language learning software and games. It's a local startup in Bethesda, or Gaithersburg, sorry. I've been doing Python for about 10 years, something like that, off and on. And I, along with Jackie Castle, help run DC Pilates. So this is our first online class. It's getting cold, and I thought we could try this because, you know, winter weather comes in and it screws up all our schedules. And I really hate, like, you know, driving into DC when it's super cold and nasty. So we can do online classes. One of the benefits of having these classes on air is not only that they're live and you can participate via some of the apps, but it actually records the event. So later on, we can save these and have them as a resource for DC Pilates and Pilates everywhere. So because this is something that is rather new, a few caveats. If something goes wrong, I will probably have to post something on the Google Plus event page saying, go here now. If the broadcast stops, I'm not sure if I can restart it or not, so I may have to move everyone to another event. So far, it seems, you know, pretty stable when I've done all the testing, so just be aware there might be some last minute changes. So how this works, you should see on your screen, now I'll warn you, my screen doesn't look like your screen. I have a lot more buttons. And if you look on your screen, you should have an icon that looks like a bunch of like squares all stacked together. Those are the apps that are available for this Hangout. And two of the apps are very important. The first one is Showcase, and that's where we'll be putting links. One of the links is to our chat room, because Google Hangouts on Air does not have a chat, does not like offer a chat room like regular Hangouts. We have to have another place where we can have a chat room. Today we're trying out talk.io, which is a very nice, it's a pretty little, very simple chat room that the link is in there, so click on that, get signed in, because that chat room is where you're going to have, if you have like an issue that comes up, that's where you're going to get help. Jackie will probably has said hi in there. Everyone's saying hello. Jackie Castle and Lee Flower are my other organizers. Oh yes, and I forgot, you know, Lee Flower is our other organizer now. So they are who you can go to for help if something goes wrong, if you're getting a weird error or something like that, because I can't see your screen and I'm also on a lag. I believe there's like a 10 to 30-second lag between me talking and you hearing it. So the other app that's going to be very important is the Q&A app. If you have a question to ask me as a teacher, not like, oh my God, this thing is exploding, but you want to know more about a certain topic, ask it in the Q&A app for two reasons. One, I'm not keeping an eye on the regular chat because I would, you know, stop every 2 minutes and have to stare at it and get caught up. Two, if you ask a question via the Q&A app, it actually makes links in the video that people can just fast forward to that question to see my answer, which is pretty cool. I like that. Ooh, let me change my text here. There we go. Much better text. So just to summarize, if something goes wrong, talk to Jackie or Annalie in the chat room. If you have a question about the material, like you want me to elaborate on something or go over something again, ask it in the Q&A app because I will see that. And look at the links under Showcase, and I'll tell you if I add another link to the Showcase app, or tell me if you want me to add that. And we and I will go ahead and add that because it also, Google Plus will also save those for later. So an overview of the class. Today it's an Intro to Python class. We are starting from the very beginning, which means we are starting with like how to start Python. And we're going to get as far as we can get in 3 hours. I have material all the way up to importing modules, which is importing more code in. And went over some next steps. We'll see how far we get. I'm hoping to get through all the material. And this is going to be what you're going to see on my screen is me live coding. Since I am actually hitting keys, you will see typos on occasion and things like that. But you should be able to see my screen, see my editor pretty well. So just as a warning, if you start like getting lag or something on your end, it may be me. It may also be if you're downloading anything in the background. So just do yourself a favor. This is not the time to like download, a Season of Bones or something. Just try to make sure you have as few background downloads as possible. So let's get started. The first question, what is Python? Well, Python is a programming language. It's a language that I personally really love using. I've worked in many languages, but Python's my favorite. I find it easy to read. I find it easy to work on. It works on every operating system, all the major operating systems. And you can do so much with it. You can do scientific data collection with it. You can create games with it. You can, create websites with it. It's not like some languages where it's really good at this one thing and then kind of good at okay at these other things. It really can do tons of things. The only place where it possibly falls short is making mobile applications. And even that, somebody is working on a tool that allows you to write Python and create iOS and Android apps. So we're getting there. So let's start off, what is a programming language? Well, programming language is actually what is programming? Programming is just a series of instructions. It can seem really complicated to people that don't understand, what it is, but that's really all it is. It's just a series of series of instructions to your computer that are just run over and over again. So for instance, here I have print hello world. And what is this going to do? Well, it's probably going to print something, and it's going to print hello world. And if I run this, oh, fine, I'll save it. It says hello world. Now, what am I working in right now? This is called idle. Idle is the IDE, or the text editor, the coding editor, that comes with Python. And I'm just double checking to make sure that nobody is messaging me. Okay, let me email somebody the link to the class real fast. Sorry. Somebody had their meetup stuff going to a trash can. There you go. All right, so anyway, back to this. When you write code, you're going to write in some kind of editor because if you I had somebody who actually did try to use Word, like Microsoft Word, and it was horrible. You don't use stuff like that. You can use something as basic as a text editor. You can use, there are all kinds of complex IDEs. Wingware makes one. Eclipse is a crazy one. This one comes with Python, and I find it to be really good to use when you're learning Python because it takes a lot of issues just out of play. You don't have to worry about paths on your computer, like where is it searching to find the code. You don't have to worry about, autocomplete, or just there's a lot of neat features that you can just use, and it comes with it, so why not? If you are on a Mac, I went over this before, but just to make sure, if you're on a Mac, open up a terminal by going to the spotlight, the little magnifying glass, search for terminal. When the terminal window opens, just type idle, IDLE, hit enter, and this will pop up. Actually, this window will pop up. This is called your shell. Oh, and if you're on Windows, if you've installed, idle is already like, you can just look under your programs and it's already a program. So this is your shell. This is, Python is like listening to you. It's actually waiting for a command. So if I say over here, print hi, it'll print hi. If I say 5 plus 20, it spits back 25. So here's my command, and here is what it spits out. So if you, so it's basically just waiting for a command. This is a great place to kind of mess around. I live in the shell when I'm at work. I often have it up. I have everything I need loaded up, and I just play around with things. You know, I see, does this bit of logic work? And once I figure out a bit of logic, then I move over here. To get this window, you'd go to File, New File, or do Control New or Command New, and this will give you a blank, like, this will give you a blank window. And here you can write code. So you can say print hello world, print hi, print 5 plus 20, and you can write a bunch of commands. To run, you either press F5 or you go to Run and then Run Module, and the result will pop out over here. So here we have hello world, hi 25. So the shell is for playing around. This is for writing like longer scripts. You know, and this is something you would want to run over and over again. So I can keep running hello world. Here I'm just going to press F5 a bunch, see? Now I will warn you, it won't run anything until you save, but that's, you know, yeah, you'd kind of need to do that. So just go ahead and save the file as whatever.py if you want to play around. So the first thing we should go over is how to save to a variable. A variable is just a container. And it holds some information, because that's one of the first things we ask of programs. Hold some information for me. It's one of the most important things that, you know, programs do, is they hold information. A variable holds information in a temporary way. So while the program is running, it fills up all these variables, and it might have like, how many apples do I have? You know, what color is the shirt? You know, what items are in the shopping cart? That kind of thing. And the values in the variables can change. So you might add to the variable, you might, you know, increment as you add apples, or take, you know, subtract as you remove, you know, apples. You might add things to the, you know, shopping cart. The person may decide, I want a pink shirt, not a blue shirt, and so you'll change the color of the shirt from pink to blue, or blue to pink, whichever one I said. When you want to save something to a variable, you have to give the variable a name. So here I could save apples, and I'm going to say we have 5 apples. And nothing was spit back out at me because Python stored the value in apples and didn't need to like do anything else. But if I just say, okay, what's in apples? 5. So if I say apples equals apples plus 2, and then check what's in apples again. And this right here will often drive people that know algebra crazy, because this is not valid in algebraic terms. But here, all we're saying is take the value that's currently in apples, add 2 of it, and store it back in apples. So, you know, that's pretty easy. You can name a variable, you can store stuff in it. Some rules about variables. One thing that you should know is that you should always use camel case, and this is camel case. Num of apples. So it's, everything is lowercase, and the words are separated by underscores. This is the convention in Python. You'll see different things if you go to like Python, if you go to Java or C or stuff, you know, this is how we like things to be named. So num underscore of underscore apples, all lowercase. Also, you can only use letters, numbers, and underscores. That's it. So if you're from the PHP world, where you might say this, num of apples with a $sign, it's not going to work. Only letters, only numbers, only underscores. Finally, you don't believe you can start with a number, and I'm going to double check this right now. So one direction, you can't do that. You can't start with a number. You have to start with either a letter or an underscore. Those two things are valid, nothing else. There's no limit on how long your variable name should be, but remember, the longer it is, the more likely it is that somebody is going to make a typo. So you might want to go ahead and make it long enough to be usable, but short enough, to you know, not screw people up while they're trying to code with no coffee, as I obviously have not drunk enough coffee. I have one question I'm going to take a quick break to answer. Arrow, get up there. Okay. So Jackie Castle asked, what if I am downloading Python in the background? Python is not that big, so you actually should be okay. I'm talking more about like videos, like really big things, or if has something released, Destiny, some video game got released. If you have Steam running in the background and it's downloading and updating a bunch of stuff, yeah, you might want to kill Steam right now, as that will completely kill your connection, I've discovered. So. All right, so let's do some math. That's exciting, because one of the first things that we do once we figured out how to get computers to store information is we made them do math for us. So math is pretty simple. A lot of it's going to look like exactly, what we do in school. So if you want to add, it's a plus sign. If you want to subtract, a sign. If you want to divide, it's the /, so that's the one under your question mark. It's not the other one. 7 divided by 2. And if you want to multiply, it's an asterisk. So that's pretty easy. The asterisk is the only one that really kind of throws people off sometimes. So one thing I do want to show you, when I do 7 divided by 2, you would expect the answer to be like 3.5, but we get 3. Now, why is that? That's because right now we're working in integers, or what you may know as whole numbers. If you only give Python whole numbers, Python assumes you want whole numbers back. This is for efficiency, because sometimes you really only need to like rough it up to figure out roughly what a value is. If it assumed you wanted high precision all the time, Python would run much more slowly. All programs would actually run much more slowly. That's why most programs, if you want precision, you have to demand it. So how do you get precision? Well, you make sure one of the numbers is what we call a float, or you might call a decimal number. So if we do 7.0 divided by 2, we'll get 3.5. Now, if you ever make this mistake where you have a program and you divide something by 2 and then you get a weird answer and everything goes awry, you have made a mistake that every single one of us has made. So don't feel bad, because I do this all the time and I'm like, oh crap, it has to be, if I need precision, I need to ask for it. So that's how you ask for precision. And either of these numbers can be the float. If you have like 900 integers and one float, Python will assume, okay, you want a float back, and we'll just start doing everything, with floats. So you'll get a decimal number back. If you don't know, one interesting thing is you can actually tell what type of value something is by doing type. So here I have type, open paren, 7 end paren. If I hit enter, Python returns type int. So that's saying this is an integer. And yeah, developers shorten everything, so because we're lazy. If you do type 4 returns type float. So then okay, this is a decimal number. This is important if you're working with variables, because you don't know what's going to be in a variable. Anything could end up in the variable as your program runs, because you're probably taking in data that you have no way to predict. So I'm going to check the chat room real fast to see if there are any questions. Oh, yes, very good point. Oh, Barbara Schretz also, she's one of our experts. She's also in the chat room. Hi, Barbara. Python will throw an error if you use a space in the variable name. So yeah, you can do that. So my friends equal 5, yeah. Syntax error, invalid syntax. So let's see. Pulling back up my notes. All right. Let's move on to strings real fast, and I'm going to take a real short break just so people can get up, get more coffee, do whatever they need to do. Let's talk about strings. Strings are basically text. That's how we deal with text in Python. And the reason it's called strings is that it's a string of characters. Each individual thing, like the A, the F, the space, the exclamation point, those are characters, and they're strung along to make a string. There's a whole history that apparently there were a lot different kinds of strings way back in the day. Today, if you say string, everybody knows you're talking about text. So to create a string, I'm in my shell, and I'm going to just put my name in. So you see I use double quotes here. You can use either double quotes or single quotes to enclose your string. But you'll notice that Python always spits it back out with single quotes. That's just because Python doesn't care what quotes you used. It'll just use it by default uses single quotes when it tells you it's a string. If you don't want those quotes to appear, and you say print, use the print statement. And the print statement will print it without any quotes. Now, one thing to note, you keep seeing me do this, where I keep just doing name. If you do this, like here, I'm going to set name to equals Katie, and just say name, and I'm going to run it. Nothing happens. This is something that's exclusive to the shell, because you're basically asking Python, hey, what is this value? And Python's like, here's the value. Here, that doesn't really work. It doesn't break your program, but it's not going to print anything out. So you actually do need to use, if you want to see what's in there, you need to use print name here. So I'll run it again, and there it says Katie. So you can actually do a bit of math with strings, which I like. So you can do, so let's say we have an asterisk, and we multiply it by 20. You actually get a string of 20 asterisks, and you can do this with a name times 5 returns a string that's 5 Katies. I use this a lot for like formatting and stuff, and you'll see into how this will work later on when we get into like for loops and stuff. You can also get the length of a string. So the length of name is 5. So one thing I'll do sometimes is like name equals Katie, and then once you print the name, the star, the asterisk, times the length of however long name is. See, look, it's all nice. It's a nice little underbar. That's just one of the silly things that I do. One thing to know about the length, though, is that it counts spaces. Spaces, tabs, all of those things are considered a character and are counted. So if you are ever like running through like how many spaces can I have here, just know that spaces are counted. So I'm going to take a very short break so I can check over and see how things are going in the chat room, and so everybody can get a cup of coffee. Let's see. Yes, 2 decimal points requires a bit of formatting. Now, one thing that may help everybody, I'm going to put something in the, come here showcase. If you want to share code, like say something is going wrong, I'm going to give you a wonderful site that was made by a friend of mine that everybody in like the Python community uses, called dpaste. And dpaste is a great site. Show the item. Okay. And dpaste is a great site. You basically can copy and paste your code into the where it says content. Select a syntax. You can use plain text. It's fine. You know, you don't have to worry about picking up Python or anything. And paste it, and it'll give you a URL that has your code. So you can take that code and paste it in the chat room without driving everybody crazy and looking at all this like weird code. It'll keep your formatting, it'll keep everything where it should, and that helps the teachers quite a bit, because then we can look at your code without trying to figure out, you know, what's going on, and it doesn't like spam the chat room. So let's see. So I'm going to bring back up and I'll say we'll be back at 10:06, 10:10, just so everybody can get some coffee and whatever they happen to need, okay? All right. I have my coffee. It is almost 10:10 again. So it looks like everybody is caught up. If you do have any trouble, just go to the chat app and make sure to use DPaste so we can see your code. And you might need one of us to do a screen share if something is really looks like it's acting weird. But otherwise, don't see any questions. So let's get started. Let me change my sign. Okay. Bring up my editor again. Now, we've gone over math and integers and floats and strings. We know how to store data. And that's great because computers are great at storing data and we like them to store data. However, if we want to start getting into logic, we need to talk about Booleans. So let me get rid of this text over here. A Boolean, a variable that holds a Boolean, can only hold one of two things, truth or false. So a Boolean either is or isn't. And if you are, here, I'm going to close this, open up a new shell, make it skinny. There you go. So if you type into your editor true with a capital T, Python returns true. And if you do the same with false, capital F false, you get false gets returned. That's because these are special values. Because if you do type true, you get type bool. Booleans are very important because there are going to be times when you need to test whether something is or isn't. Do we have more than 5 apples? Do we have 10 items in the cart? Is the temperature over 40 degrees? That kind of stuff. So often when you're looking for Boolean, you're actually comparing one thing to another thing. So let's go over some of the operators. So the first one we're going to go over is 2 equal signs. I know sometimes on some screens this looks like 1 equal sign, but it's actually 2 equal signs. So if you say 5 equal 5, you're basically asking Python, does 5 equal 5? And it does. If you say, does 6 equal 5, you get false. So that's pretty easy. Now, you of course wouldn't say, does 5 equal 5 in most programs, but you might test to see, is the number of, like, here we have our apples is equal to 5. Do we have more than 6 apples? We don't. Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me? Okay, it was wrong. It muted me for a second. So, do we have 6 apples? We do not. False. But if we say apples, do we have 5 apples? We do. So that's why you would do that, and you could even compare like apples to oranges, actually. So that's for testing for equality. Sometimes you also want to test for inequality. And then you use an exclamation point, and we call it a bang, because you use them quite a bit, and an equal sign. So bang equals, are these two things not equal? So does 5 not equal 6? That's true. 6 is not equal to 6? That's false. You can also use greater than, less than, just like you would in math class. So is 6 greater than 5? It is. Is 5 greater than 6? It is not. You can also do greater than or equal to, or less than and equal to, and that's just greater than sign, equal sign, less than sign, equal sign. And that will return true. So is 6 greater than or equal to 5? Is 5 greater than or equal to 5? So those are both true because it is either greater than or equal to. So that's comparison, and that's really important as you go along because you're often want to see if something is equal to something else, and then do this, otherwise do this. And that's actually the next thing we're going to do. You can also chain these with and or. So let's say we have 5 greater than 4, and 5 greater than 3. Now what we're doing with AND is you can chain multiple Boolean expressions, which is what all of these are. These are all Boolean expressions. You can chain them, and you can test for a bunch of things. So one of the ways I describe using AND is going to buy fish at Petco. If you go to Petco, is it Petco? It's something like that. PetSmart. Petco's a car place. If you go to PetSmart and you want to buy a fish, there's a few things that they will actually ask you. They say, one, are you over 18? In the state of Virginia, you have to be over 18 in order to buy a fish. 2, are you going to use the fish for any nefarious purposes? There are feeder fish and there are non-feeder fish, and they do actually tag people who do things that you're not supposed to with fish. And sometimes even as innocuous as, oh, I'm going to release it into the wild. You can't do that. 3, you have to have enough money. So, you have to have a way to pay for the fish. Those are the 3 things. All those things have to be true in order for you to buy a fish. You have to be over 18. You have to not want to release it into the wild or do something really weird and unethical to it. And you have to have enough money. So that's how AND works. So if I say, 5 greater than 4 and 5 greater than 3, I get true. But if I do 5 greater than 4 and 5 greater than 6, this first one is true. The second one is false. Now, remember, if even one thing, I could have 30 things all chained together. If even one thing is false, Python will return false because everything has to be true. Now, you can use OR also. So we go up here. I'm going to grab this code, say OR instead. Now the way OR works, only one thing has to be true. So you can buy a fish, you go to pay for it. And the cashier says, well, you can pay with credit, you can pay with a check, you can pay with cash, you can pay with a gift card. Any of those. As long as one of those is true, you can buy a fish. You do not need to have all those forms of purchase available. So you don't need to have a credit card, a debit card, cash, and a gift card in order to buy the fish. You just need one that'll work. So this is obviously true because both of these expressions are true, but this one, our first one is true, and our second one is false, but Python returns true this time because only one thing had to be true. And you could, once again, if you have 30 things and you're using OR, as long as one thing is true, Python will return true because that's all you need. Now, this is great and all. We can compare things. All right, fine. Where this really comes into play is something called an if statement. And for that, I'm going to move over here. An if statement will run code only under certain conditions. And in this case, the first one we're going to go over is it basically has to be true. So we're going to set, we have, if apples is greater than 4, print, you have many. Now you'll notice, here I'm going to do another one. Boot. Sorry, it keeps muting me when I type. Okay, so basically we've set apples to 5, and if apples is greater than 4, it's going to print, you have many apples, woot, you don't need any more. Now, notice how everything is indented. This is called a block. And this is the way Python knows to run certain code only in certain conditions. Because what Python will do is it will run down this file and it will keep just running everything. It will only run this code, this block, if apples is greater than 4. So let's run this. Yes, save it. Okay, so because apples is 5, apples is greater than 4, and it prints you have many apples, woot, you don't need any more. Now I'm going to add one more thing to this. Print goodbye. I'm going to run it again. Now it says, the same thing, but watch what happens if I change this to 6. So apples is 5. So 5 is not greater than 6. In this case, when I run, all it prints is goodbye because it didn't run anything in the block because apples is it didn't print anything that was in this block because, well, 5 is not greater than 6. So it skipped all of this code. And that's basically how an if statement works. Let me answer this real fast before moving on. Can you explain why your screen looks that way? Why is your screen the angle brackets on the left and a block of code on the right? How does someone get there? So this is your shell. When you open up idle, either by typing idle into your terminal if you're on a Mac or on Linux, or by opening up the idle program in Windows, something like this will open up, and it'll start off with this, Python 276, whatever. This is basically Python listening, and it's waiting for you to enter a command. When you enter that command, it'll run it immediately. So it's kind of like a dumb minion that you're just like, go do this. And they're just going to go run off and do it, and then it'll come back and ask for the next command. This over here you get to by under your shell going to File, New File, or doing Control New or Command New. And over here, this is where you can actually write code. So you can write a script that you can save and execute later. So I can save this and run it as many times as I want. So I can just keep hitting F5, not F6, F5, and it'll keep running it. So this is where I actually save my code. In general, I mess around over here and I do longer form code over here, the code I want to keep. So, all right, let's move on. So if statements are cool because you can run code if something is true or something is not true. Now, sometimes you want to run something like you want to run some code if something is true, otherwise you want to run this other code. Then you can use else. So else is always paired with if. So you have if something, do this, else do this. Think of else as otherwise. Otherwise, do this. A good example of this that I'm stealing from Barbara is, let's say you want to go to lunch and you say, if you're ready to go for lunch, go to lunch, let's go now. Else, let's go in an hour. So here, if apples is greater than 6, say you have many apples, you don't need any more. Otherwise, else, print, maybe you should get more apples. And I'll warn you, I apologize if my voice breaks out every once in a while. It's because Google Plus likes to mute me if it hears me typing. So let's run this. Apples is equal to 5, so apples is not greater than 6, so this isn't true. So instead, it prints, maybe you should get more apples instead. And then it prints goodbye. So that's how an else statement works. And else has its own block. You can have as many lines in it as you want. And I'm going to make this shorter because that's going to keep annoying me. Maybe you should get more. And let's just add another sentence to it. So let's run this. So if apples is greater than 6, print this stuff, but it's not, so we print maybe you should get more. The bin is right over there. Let's change the number of apples to 7 and watch what happens. So in this case, only because apples is 7, apples is greater than 6, only this block is run. That's it. This is not run. So this is great. So we can do some code if something is true, and other code if that code isn't true. Now, you can do just fine with this, but often you want to check for more than one thing. So let's say you want to go to lunch. You say, if you're ready to go for lunch now, let's go. Otherwise, if you're available in an hour, let's go then. Otherwise, I'm going to find somebody else to go get lunch with because you're being impossible. In that case, you add something called an elif. Think of it as else if smushed together because programmers are lazy. So elif needs its own Boolean expression. So elif apples is greater than 4, print that's a good number, print but you can get more. So in this case, let's change it to 5 and run it. Yeah, save it. So in this case, apples is equal to 5. So this first thing isn't true. So 5 is not greater than 6, so this is not run. Then it checks to see if apples is greater than 4. And it is, so it prints this, and the else is skipped. Now the thing about if and elif and else, all these things being paired together, as you run through, as soon as something is true, Python just stops. It's like, okay, I found the thing that's true, and it stops. It does not check anything else. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to check if more than one thing might be true, you might want a series of if statements. This has tripped me up when I first learned about elifs. I was like, oh, great, everything's going to be an elif. And then I realized there are times when you want to do things you know, you want to have multiple if statements. So just keep that in mind. Once you come to something that's true, Python just stops, you know, and moves on, and it moves on to this last statement, which is goodbye. So now one thing, I just want to show you an if statement real fast in the shell if you're messing around in the shell. So if 5 equals 5, you automatically get the indent just like you do in idle over on this side. In order, so print, in order to get out of this, just hit enter again to end your block. And that's just how if statements work over here. If you want to do something more complex, then you hit delete, elif 6 equals 6, print no. This is just fake code. So that's how they work in the shell. If you ever do an if statement in the shell, if you need to add an else or an elif, just hit backspace and keep on going. If you want to end the block, if you're done, just keep hitting enter until it runs. So we have done Boolean expressions and if statements. Let me look at the chat and see where everyone is and if everybody's doing okay. So let's see. And I'm sorry, I type pretty quickly, so if people are trying to follow along and type, it can be a little harrowing. But I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so we can move on to input. So programs are great and they're rad and all, that's nice. But we do eventually want to get input from the user. And there's many ways to get input. And input is basically, there's two things in a program. Well, there's more than that. But there's input and output, which is a significant part of what we deal with when we do computing. Input is all the information going in. Output is all the stuff going out from the program. So it's everything that's spewing out back at you. With input can come from many places. It can come from another website. Like I can go to Twitter and say, hey, give me who is trending on Twitter right now in Turkey, that kind of stuff. You can make those queries. You can get input from the environment. If you have a program hooked up to a barometer, you could check what barometers check, air pressure, that kind of stuff. You know, what's the temperature in my oven, that kind of thing. You can also get input from the user just by saying, look, give me your age. The most basic form of input that we can work with right now is actually something called input. It looks like this. So I'm going to say name, age equals input. So what do we have here? We have a variable called age. We have a built-in method. That's what these things are called when you have that and there's the parentheses. This is a built-in method called input. Then we have some text here. So we have a string, and then we're going to print out whatever's an age. So let's go ahead and run this and just see what it does, and we'll talk about, so what is my age? I am 34, and it prints 34. So what this is this is your prompt. Whatever text you put here is your prompt. So it's very good idea. It's a good idea to, you know, actually get a prompt, because if you do not have a prompt, like let's say you just have nothing in there, this is what it looks like. So it's really confusing because it's just, my cursor is just kind of sitting there. So I'll say 34 again, and it'll do. But if you don't know what's going on, it can be a little confusing. So I highly recommend having a prompt. Now, what exactly is it saving? So we printed out age. Let's print, print the type of age. Kind of data are we working? What kind of data are we working with here? And let's run it. So it saved age as an int. And if I run it again, let's say my daughter answers this because she is going to be super specific. She is 6.75. We got a float back. So what input is saving is literally what you typed in there, which is great because it's great for getting numbers because you automatically get a number. It's really nice. The problem with it is that it's really easy to break. So let's say we run it and my son answers it and he says 13 in text. Blech. You get an error. Whenever you get something called a traceback, that's an error. And it's basically saying, I have no idea what you're talking about here. So that's why that doesn't work. You know, so it's great for getting numbers, but in general, you want to use something called raw input. Raw input takes whatever the user enters and saves it into a string, which is nice and safe because then you can do lots of lovely error checking and, you know, mess around with it and say, okay, did they give me a number? Did they give me, you know, what exactly did they give me? So let's run this. And I'll give it my age. It did save 34, but it saved it as a string. I'm going to answer some quick questions. Will this class have a break? Sure, we can take a quick break at 11 o'clock. So the class only runs till 12:30, but I can run past, so I'll say at 11 o'clock we'll take like a 15-minute break. And come on. There we go. What's the difference between input and raw input functions? Explaining that now, as I said, raw input will save whatever the input is and save it as a string, whereas input will just save it, you know, as what it is. So if you give it a float, it'll save it as a float. If you give it an int, it'll save it as an int. It can get even more crazy and complex. I've seen people do this. Don't. Just it can get real nasty. So I usually save input for when I trust the user. And by the way, the #1 lesson, if you take away anything today, is don't trust the user. So So right now, okay, we're going to use raw input to get the person's age. What if we need to add a number to it? You can actually convert a string back in, like into a number using a built-in called, int or float. Usually the safest way to do this is, so like, let's say we really want age to be an integer. We really want it to be an integer. We don't want the 6.75. We want it to be 34,613, that kind of thing. You can do this. So, and then we will print the type for age again. We'll run this, run the module. So I give my age is 34. At first it's a string, then we do some conversion, and then we say, age equals the integer value for age, and now it's an int, which is nice. But this can still break, because what happens if you do like int for 13? Yeah, it'll break. So that's how we get into while loops. While loops are great. While loops will run a block of code while something is true. So, and I'm going to actually introduce two things here. So let me write the code real fast, and I will show you, and I'm making sure nobody's tweeting at me. Okay, good, that's my husband's phone. I'm going to write the code, and then I'm going to explain what's going on here. So, I'm going to introduce three things, actually. Okay, so I had to be quiet so that I didn't get muted again. So let me run through this code line by line. So first we're going to try and get somebody's age, and we're going, oops, I already have a typo. Raw input is what I want to use. So we're going to get the age from somebody, and we're going to store it into a string using raw input. While not, now not is interesting. Not basically reverses a Boolean. So if you say not, I'm over here in the shell now, not true, Python returns false. If you say not false, Python returns true. So it basically reverses it. It makes your code more readable. There's other ways to do it, but yeah, not is very readable. So while not, age dot is digit. Now what this does is it checks a string, and it wants to make sure that the string is made of nothing but digits, so 0 through 9. If there's a period in there, if there's letters in there, if there's spaces in there, it says, nope, false. There's something that's not a digit in there. If I find something in there that's not a digit, I print not valid, which is not my kindest error message, but it's true. And then I try to get the age again. This loop is going to keep running. These two lines are going to keep running until the user gives me something I want. This is where I use, I like to use loops. I use loops. You use while loops all the time. You use it if you have a program that needs to run until the user wants to quit. If you need to run through a bunch of things. This is one of the places where I really like to use while loops because it helps you get valid input. And once again, don't trust the user. So let's run. Let's make sure that I'm not losing mine. Okay, age. First thing I'm going to do is do my daughter's age. Oh, it says not valid. Then I'll do my son's, not valid. Then I'll do mine. And ta-da! It works. So I can get a valid age without breaking my program, because I'm not converting until I know, I'm not converting to an integer until I know I have only digits. And you could actually, even expand on this. So check the length, while, the value in age can't be over 3 digits or something like that. You can check for all kinds of things. I do recommend that if you are getting input, get in the habit of cleaning it up, because users are terrible and they will destroy your program. So that is a while loop. Now, before we move on to lists and for statements, I want to check this chat real quick. Oh, and I'm done answering that question, didn't it? Okay. So let's see. Leaf flowers, comment. All right, I'm going to look for that setting. Hangout toolbox, control room. Don't see that. Where are my settings? Ah, it is not popping up for me. I think next time it comes up, I think I should be able to stop it from doing that. Okay. Should be in my, I have a gear icon. I have a gear icon, but it's not showing that as an option for my settings. It might just be my, I'm on Linux, and we're always the poor forgotten children that get left behind. So I will figure that out for next time. That, or get a quieter keyboard. So let's move on. After I get a drink of water, to lists. Lists are awesome. I use lists all the time in Python because, it's just really convenient to throw things in lists. I mean, we use lists in our day-to-day life. You create grocery lists and to-do lists and Christmas lists and shopping lists and, that kind of stuff. Instructions for making a cake, whatever. We use lists all the time. So in order to make a list in Python, I'm going to create a list of colors. And lists are enclosed in square brackets. Square brackets are after the P, and they're the ones that are rectangular. You want to be very careful which ones you use, because Python is picky about what brackets you use. They all have different meanings. So you can have colors in it, so red, yellow, blue. And each item in the list is separated by a comma. And you can put anything into lists. You can have numbers, strings, Booleans, all kinds of crazy. You can even put lists in lists. You can do wacky stuff with them. Just don't do anything that'll make future developers or future you hate, previous you. Which is why I kind of stay away from lists within lists within lists. But anyway, here is a list of colors, red, yellow, and blue. We'll print colors. Let's run. So it just returns red, yellow, blue. One of the things to note, every item in a list has a specific place, and that is called its index. Indexes start at 0. So This drives a lot of beginners crazy because you would think the first item in the list would be like at index 1, and it's not. It's at index 0. And there's lots of reasons why we do this. And they're kind of boring. It's computer sciencey reasons and history reasons, and just basically computer scientists start counting at 0. So if one of your nerdy friends is always like, if when they're enumerating things start at 0, they're being cute. So anyway, this first item, red is at index 0, yellow is at index 1, and blue is at index 2. Oh, and I'm going to pull up the Q&A app again, just in case anybody asks me any questions. So why is this important? Well, often you don't want to deal with the list as a whole, you want to deal with items in the list. So you can print colors, whatever is in the list colors at index 0 by saying colors, square bracket, the index number, and square bracket. So let's run this, and it prints out red. And if we change this to 1 and run it, it'll print out yellow. Now, if we put in 7, which we don't have 7 items in this list, we get an error. It's out of range. We can only print 0, 1, 2. You can also add things to a list. So here I have colors, red, yellow, and blue. I'm going to print out colors. Then, in order to add something to the list, I use append. So colors, period, append, and then the value you want to append. So we'll append indigo. And we'll print colors out again. So you see at first we have red, yellow, blue. Then we have red, yellow, blue, indigo. That goes at the end because that's what append is. It adds it to the end. Another cool thing you can do is you can see if something is in a list. So here we have, and I'm going to do this over here. So I'm just going to copy and paste. So colors is red, yellow, and blue. I can see to ask Python, is red in colors? And it is. Is green? It is not. It is not. So so red is in colors, green is not in colors. This is a very useful thing to do. If you need to see, if something is in a list, then do this, otherwise do this other thing. You can also get the length of a list. We checked earlier to see how to get the length of a string. Well, that works just the same. So we do len colors 3. We have 3 items in the list. And there are a lot of actually very useful things to do with lists. You can insert things, you can remove things. One of the ways to investigate like everything you can do with an item is to use help, is to use dir or help. So let's say we do help on colors. Now colors is a list. So what we're going to get is a help page for everything about lists. And when I say everything, I mean like everything. This is not going to look good on my screen because I'm very narrow right now because I need it to be narrow and big text. But it'll go through all of the functions that you can use. And generally, the ones you're going to want to use do not have these underscores, these double underscores. They're the ones without it. So append. So here we have append. You can list, append, and then something, append the object to the end. Count. Count value, and it returns an integer. That's what this arrow means. This is what it returns, an integer. Return number of occurrences of a value. Extend. You can actually create a list, make a list bigger by extending it by another list. So if you run through these, they're usually pretty. If you sit there and just take a moment and read over them, read them out loud, they start to make sense. And if all else fails, then just go to Dr. Google and say, hey, Dr. Google, Python list pop. What does that mean? And you'll come across blog articles and such that will explain in detail what pop means, or remove, or how to use it. So let's move on to for statements, and then we're going to take a break, a little bit longer, a 15-minute break, because I need water, I need more coffee, and I'm sure everybody else needs to get up and move around. So, for statements. For statements are great to use with lists. So we're going to have colors again. So here I have the beginning of my for statement. For color in colors, and what it's going to do is it's going to take the list colors and it's going to run this loop for every item in the list. So it's going to store that loop variable into color. So we start off with red. The first item is red in colors. So we store red into color and we print that color. Then we go to the next one. We store yellow into color and print that color. And then we do the same for blue. So let's run this. So pretty easy, red, yellow, blue. This is often one of the things when you make a list, you do what's called iterating through the list. So you basically do something for each item in the list. You iterate through. So you start with red, you do stuff for red, then you move on to yellow, do stuff for yellow, and you might have one line, you might have 100 lines. You might be running through every item in a shopping cart and displaying the item and all the details about the item. So that is how for loops work. They are extremely powerful and extremely useful. And I have Q&A questions. Let's see. Are you able to use a plus sign in place of a pen to include more items? Well, let's see. Let's try that out. So let's say I have, A is equal to 1. Crazy keys. Okay. B is equal to 4 and 5. So A plus B. But that's not going to change A, and it's not going to change B. So you could say A is equal to A plus B. Now, one thing to note, let's say we have A, and we want to add 6 to it. Can't do that. You would need A plus 6 in a list, so one item in a list, and then that would work. So append is for appending a single item to a list. It's generally the accepted way of doing it. It's a little bit easier to read if you're just glancing through code. You certainly could do this, where you say A equals A plus a list with one item in it. I recommend using append. Next question. So using the while loop is like checking for exception errors. No, because false is a perfectly valid thing to be. Things can be false, but they're not exceptions. For exceptions, and I'm going to go over this real fast, and this might fly past some people that are, beginners. If you want to check for exception errors, you need to use a try except. So here, I'm going to try to divide by 0. Try D equals 1 divided by 0. By the way, 1 divided by 0 will always give you an error. It should give you an error in every single language. This is not a Python thing, this is a math thing. If you can divide by 0, the universe falls apart. So we are going to try to store the result of 1 divided by 0 into D. That is going to fail. Then you have an except. So if this fails, run this, print, oh my God, what? And run this, and it says, oh my God, what? And your program does not crash. It'll keep on running. One thing I will say, this is called a naked except, and it's bad. You generally don't want to do it. There's a few very small edge cases where people do this because you absolutely have to. They're very small. You should generally have the actual exception you want to accept. If you want to look into try except, I would read all up on them on the Python docs, because there's ways to do them right and there's ways to do them oh so very wrong. And don't wrap your entire program in a try except, because errors aren't bad. Errors are good. Errors are our friends. Errors tell us how to fix our programs. If you ever gotten a generic error, something went wrong, and you have no idea what went wrong, and you can't even tell somebody where things went wrong, that's because people are being a little bit too cagey about letting errors get through. So that's that question. Next one. In the code for color and colors, does Python know that color means the items in the list colors because color is a singular of colors, or is that defined? That's just my convention. If you are, you could say for, I and items is a list. But in Python, that's generally stylistically what you want to do. So I like to have my lists end in the plural. So colors equals, R, G, B. I generally want that to end in a plural so that if somebody is just roaming through my code 50 lines later and they see colors, they can assume that I'm probably talking about a list. And if I'm going through a list, it just looks nice to say for color in colors. But you could also say for C, for item, for cats. You could say whatever you want, but this is clearer. Where can you find isDigit information and others like these? Well, since we used isDigit with a string, I recommend using help again. So I'm just going to pass it an empty string. So give me help about, oh, I guess it didn't like that. Name? Oh, I guess I have to actually, that's weird. Let me try name equals Katie. Help name. I guess you can't pass it a string. So in that case, unless I can get, well, one thing you can do is dir name, and that gives you a list of things you can do. No idea why help doesn't work with strings. It's really weird. It's probably just a weird Pythonism. And I'll have to look that up later. If somebody else can look that up and figure that out. You can also go to the documentation on python.org. And let me see if I can find that now. Nope, come on. Python string documentation. And ta-da! Lots of string documentation at python.org. So, that's usually my default response is, Google it. After you get used to Googling it for a while, you preface it with Python, whatever thing you're looking for. And if you want documentation, I'll often add documentation. If not, you'll probably get useful blog posts and stuff like that. So we are pretty much at 11 o'clock. So let's take a quick 15-minute break so I can get some coffee. I'm going to update my sign. And we'll be back at 11:15. See you then. All right. Almost back. One more minute. Gonna let people finish sugaring up their coffee and stuff. Let Jackie finish her pancakes that she apparently got. I had a microwave breakfast ball, have you now? So jealous. All right. Okay, bringing my notes back up. So let's talk about dictionaries. Dictionaries are very cool. I use them all the time. I'm going to get myself a new shell. New shell. Make it, come on, get small. Okay, there you go. Dictionaries are just like they are in real life in Python. In a dictionary in the real world, you have a definition and you have a word and then you have the definition. In a Python dictionary, you have a key and you have a value. So the key, keys are unique, values are not. So it's basically a way of storing paired data. This goes to this, and they are enclosed in curly brackets. So let me make a dictionary over here. I'm going to make a dictionary where, 1, 1, 2, 2. This is a very simple crap dictionary. And nums is equal to this. So print out nums. Now, the first thing you should notice about dictionaries, this first part, that's the key. This is the value associated with it. These pairs are held together by a colon, and each pair is separated by a comma. So here we have a dictionary called nums, where the keys are basically, it's a string, 2, 1, that kind of thing. And the value associated with it is the integer associated with it. So the way you can get information out of a dictionary is you can use the keys. Just like you'd get into your house with a key, you get data out of a dictionary using a key. So if we say, hey nums, oops. Hey nums, what value have you stored for the key 2? And it says, I have stored the integer 2. And if you do the same thing for 1, it'll return 1. But 3, and there is nothing for 3, you get an error. Dictionaries are one of those things when I first, found them, I'm like, what am I going to do with this? This, okay, whatever, it's a list. They're very useful because, one, they're very fast. This was the first thing I discovered about them. They're very fast. And it's interesting because keys are unique, you can use them to keep your data very clean. So I'll often do like, okay, if this key is in here already, I already have a value for it. All kinds of like data munging that I do, that kind of stuff. So one of the things you can do with dictionaries is you can get all the keys out of them. So if you say nums.keys, it'll return all the keys you have. So it's returned 2 and 1. And if you do nums.values, you get all the values. So you basically want to have the keys be something simple. You do not use a list. I don't think you even can use a list, although sometimes I've seen some versions where you can. Don't use a list. Use something like a string or a number, something that can be, unequivocally unique. Also, one thing to notice how when I printed out, like when I stored nums, I stored 1 then 2. But when I printed it out, I got 2 and then 1. That's because Python doesn't care about order with dictionaries. It's not about order. It's just about the pairs. So let's talk about that unique thing. So let's say this is what nums is right now. Okay, 2, 2, 1, 1. Let's say I want nums of 2 to be equal to 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Then we check to see what's in nums. Now, 2 has a different value associated with it because every time you save in, like if you say, okay, now you can change that, it's going to change that value. It's going to dump out the old value and save a new value. To add a number to a dictionary, all you have to do, you don't have to do append or anything like that. All you have to do is say nums of whatever new key you want to use is equal to whatever value you want it to be. And if we check nums, we now have a new value. So, this is very useful because you can keep, adding values on. You can also see if something is in the keys. It does not check values, so just know that. So is for in nums. Nope. Is 3 in nums. It is. So you can check to see if a key is already in a dictionary. I'd recommend doing this if you're not sure if something is going to be in a dictionary yet, because as you see, if you try to access that value, you get an error. So that's basically dictionaries. They're really easy to use. I highly recommend, keeping them in the back of your mind, because the more you use them, the more you think about like, they become really useful. I probably programmed in Python for a while before I really used them to their full potential. The reason I'm showing you dictionaries is because we're going to need it for part of the next section, which is functions. Functions are bits of code that you save and you can run later in your program. So we've been doing stuff like int, len, those kind of things. And they're called built-in functions that have already been written for you and are always ready to go whenever you load Python. Well, now we're going to create our own function. So the first kind of function we're going to do is one where it's just going to do some stuff. So we start off by defining it using def, D-E-F. We give our function a name. We have to put some parentheses there, and you'll see why later, and a colon, and then we're going to have a block of code. So here we have a function called menu, and we're just going to print stuff. And the reason I called it menu is that this kind of function is one I would often use when I just want to print a bunch of stuff out to the screen. So let's run this. Yeah, fine, save it. And nothing happens. Now, the reason nothing happened was I defined a function, but I didn't save it. I didn't call it. So it exists, but I haven't actually used it yet. In order to call my function, I have to do this. So to call it, I use the function name and then parentheses. Let's run it again and see what happens. This time it was called and stuff got printed out. So one thing I see a lot of beginners do, and people who have been doing this for a while, up to 15 years, is they'll do this. They'll just print out the function name and expect it to be called. Well, let's see what happens when we run this. And okay, it doesn't do it there. You might see something like this. Angle bracket function menu at blah. That's because all Python is doing is saying, yeah, that's totally a function, and here's where I put it in memory. It's not exactly an error, but it's not what you expected to happen. So if you see that, just know that all you forgot was the parentheses, so you can call it. So that's the most basic kind of function, and that's okay, and that's something you need to do sometimes, just to go do some stuff. But sometimes you actually want to send something to a function. So in this case, I'm going to write a new function called say hello. And I'm going to send it a value, a parameter, and I'm going to call it name. So I have my function. It's called say hello. And I'm going to send it something into a parameter, which is this thing right here called name. That's going to create a variable called name, and it's going to store whatever value I send it into that variable, into that parameter. So let's call it. And let's run it. Oh, dear. There we go. So when I call this function, it says, hello, Jackie, how are you? Because I called it with Jackie. If I change this to Annalie and run it, it's going to say, hello, Annalie. And this is really nice because, now we can send values to our function and it'll use it. Now, what happens if we send it nothing? So here it's sending nothing. Let's see what happens. We get an error. And that's a problem because, what if we don't have a name to send to it? Well, one thing we can do is we can create a default. So, and this throws people off sometimes. What a default is. So you can add a default value to a parameter, which says, if I get nothing, if you don't tell me what I'm supposed to save into this parameter, I'm just going to use this value. So I'm going to run this twice. The first time, we didn't send it a value. So it said hello person because there was no value, so we just used person. The second time we sent Barbara, so we said hello Barbara instead of saying hello person. With defaults, it can be very tempting to give everything a default. Sometimes you just don't want to accept like not having a default. One example would be if you are accepting a social security number. You don't want to have a default social security number. You're going to have a very angry person somewhere in the United States because you should definitely have that value. And yes, that is a point where you should either, break down or, make sure that before that function gets called, you have some sort of value that works. So that is a function that has a default value, has a parameter. Now let's talk about returning values. So sometimes you want to call a function, have it do stuff, and then return a value to you. So let's make one. And I'm going to make one called get name. And the name is going to be equal to so my name, we're going to call get name. So what's going on here? We have a function called getName. Now getName returns a value. Well, when you return a value, you want to tell Python what to do with it. In this case, we're saving it into a variable. That's pretty much the most basic thing you can do. You'll sometimes see functions where you'll call something and it'll return something. We do some other crazy stuff to it and it gets all like, weird. That's like there's real complex things you can do. In this case, all we want to do is call it and get a value back and save it into a variable. So we're calling getName. We are getting somebody's name, and then we're returning that name. And then we're going to print it out. So let's run. So my name is Katie, and it prints out Katie. Now, notice that in here, I have something called name. I have a variable called name, and then I return it. And here it's called my name. So what happens if I try to say print? This is very important. Pay attention to this. So my name is Katie. So it prints out Katie, but then I get a traceback error. Name error, name is not defined. The reason why is because of scope. When you're in a function, variables that you create inside that function or the parameters or whatever, they get deleted as soon as the function's done. This is how Python does some of its memory management. It basically releases them and allows the garbage collectors to come and say, we don't need this data anymore. If Python remembered all the time all these variables, programs would be almost unusable. Because what if you had something called name later on and you accidentally change that because you called a function called getName? So just remember that if you create it inside the function, that goes away. All those values go away. So if you want them to be used in the main function, you have to return them to the main function or to like the main program. So let's see. We've talked about sending creating parameters. We've talked about returning values. And let's see, it's 11:31, so I think we have time to make a little bit more kooky functions. One thing you can do is that I find very useful is called args. So let's create a function called print many. Now this looks weird, and you might be saying, Katie, you put a an asterisk there, and you can't use asterisks. You can only use numbers and letters and underscores, and you did something wrong. I did not do anything wrong. It's special. So let's call this. We're going to call print many. We're going to call it 1, 2. So what happened here? Basically, I set a bunch of values to print many, and it saved all of those values into a list called args. And you can call args whatever you want. I recommend calling them args because other Python developers will immediately recognize what you're doing. Like if they look at your function, but they only see one chunk, they don't see like where you defined it. They're like, aha, you used args. I know what that is. And I will prove to you it's a list. Print args, print type args. We'll run it again. And I guess, and here it's calling it a tuple. And this is kind of important. A tuple is a kind of list, but you can't change it. So I can't like append to it. I can't mess around with it. And use the parens instead of the square brackets. So I sent a bunch of values in. It saved it as a tuple, and it printed out those values. So that can be useful if you don't know how many things is going to get sent to a function. Because every once in a while you do have something like, how many pets do you have? Give me the names for all your pets. Well, we might have Jackie who has like 3 dogs, something like that. There's me, I have 1 dog and a fish. I know people that have 10 dogs, they might have 0 dogs. So that's how that works. Another thing you can do is do something called keyword args. And for this, we need 2 asterisks. Now, I'm going to have to rewrite this here, print many. And the first thing I'm going to do is print keyword arg so you can see what it is. Okay. Print type for keyword args. Now for this one, instead of just sending a bunch of values, I'm actually going to do something different. So let's say my dog is Gizmo. My fish is co. Let's run this. This time, we sent a bunch of values, but we named them. We gave them keywords, and we saved those into a dictionary. So over here, you can see that my fish is actually the keyword used, and it's saved co, and my dog is named Gizmo. So this can be useful if you know you don't know how much data you're going to need, and you want to have like a dictionary kind of thing where you've paired one with another. So address is this, state is this, that kind of thing. That can be very useful. And that's basically, where it will put any data it doesn't know about. If you have something like keyword args or args, data will start getting shoveled into there if Python doesn't quite know what to do with it. So that is functions. Let's see, it's 11:35. I'm going to see if there's any questions. And there is. Is there a way to run only a piece of code in a module as opposed to the whole module? We're actually just about to go over modules. So I'm assuming when you're talking about module, you're talking about things that we would import, and we haven't gone over that. That's next. Anybody who's freaking out. Yes, there is a way to import just one thing from a module. I'm hoping that's what you're asking about. If not, ask in chat, and we'll try to clarify that and ask again in the QA app. Okay, I'm going to take a brief moment to look at chat to see where we are. Let's see. Yes, def is short for define because we're lazy. If your video is getting hung, try restarting your browser also, because sometimes the browser just gets overloaded, especially I have this happen all the time in Chrome where I just have to restart. Somebody had really yummy oatmeal. Oh, and somebody else is getting waffles. God, my husband is patching computers this weekend, so he can't make me waffles or pancakes. All right. So let's talk about modules. Modules are a place where your program can really start to take off. And I love modules because Python comes with a ton of modules. In short, what a module is, it's a bunch of code somebody else wrote that you can import into your program to add tons of functionality. Python comes with a bunch of them. In fact, hold on just a sec. How many modules does Python have? Python has this many modules. So many. This is a book by my good friend Doug Hellman. It's thick and it's kind of scary, but it's actually extremely readable if you go through it, because he basically goes through every single module and shows examples for how to use each one of them. It's not a book you read from beginning to end. I was a tech reader on this, and I did read it from beginning to end because that's what you do. But this is one where really you just open it to like what module you're interested in. So let's do some stuff with modules. Because if there's a module for it, you probably want to use that versus writing it yourself. And actually, this is the first question you should ask yourself when you start to write something. You look at what your problem is and think, but surely somebody must have had this problem before me, because you don't want to rewrite the wheel. Unless you really think you can do it better, you should probably use what somebody else has written, because it's normally not even just one person. There are dozens of people that have gone over this code. There's, thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000 people that have tested this code in production, whether they knew it or not. So we know that it works, we know that it's stable, and we know that it's just, it's going to make your life easier. So there's two ways to import a module that I'm going to show you. There's a third way, but I swore I would not show anybody how to do that anymore, because a friend of mine asked me. So there is from the most basic one. You spell it module. So you import whatever the module name is called. You wouldn't say module. You could say like random, date, time, that kind of thing. Or you can do from a module, import thingy. So from this module, import this thing. Could be a function, could be a value, could be a lot of things. But you say from this module, I want to import this thing. There is also this from module import star. Don't do that. There's a really long talk on why you should not do that, why it kind of gums up your program and can make things complicated. If you do that, you might as well just say import module. So don't, even if you see other people do it, there's very few cases where you want to do that. So let's start talking about modules and let's start using some of them. One of the ones that I love to use is random. Import random. Now random does what it says on the tin. It does a bunch of stuff with regards to random numbers. So over here, let's go back down here, import random, and we're going to use help on random. Get all kinds of stuff. And random is surprisingly hard. Like people in the chat who are mathy, that have a math background or have to deal with this, know how hard random can actually be. It's, a lot of people think, oh, it's so simple. It's actually quite hard to get true random. And by the way, if you're doing super sciencey stuff or cryptography stuff, this is a pseudo random number generator. Good enough for like 99.9% of the population. If you are part of that 0.1%, there are other modules you should be checking out. So this, if you go there, you can see all kinds of stuff you can do. And I'm going to show you some of the things we can do. So we've imported random. So one of the first things I like to do is random.randint. And what you need to do is give it two numbers. So we'll say 1 and 10. And let's go ahead and run this. Oh, print random.randint. Okay, give me a 9, run it again, gave me an 8, run it again, gave me a 10. So you're getting a random number between 1 and 10. And to prove that this is actually a pretty good random distribution, I'm going to just do a little bit of code right here. So first, nums is equal to an empty dictionary, which is totally legit. You can make empty dictionaries and empty lists. We do it all the time. So for I in range 1000. Now what is range 1000? It's a built-in function that returns a list starting with 0, ending with 1 short of 1000. So basically this is a list that's going to run 1000 times. Let's see, n equals So what this code is doing, we're going to run this bit 1000 times. We're going to get a random number, a random integer. And if that number is a key in nums, we're going to add 1 to the value. Otherwise, we're going to make the value for that key 1. So basically, every time we find one, we're going to add 1 to it. Then we're going to print nums. Let's run it. So as you can see, it's pretty even. 108, we found 108, 102, 80, 90. If we keep running it, you'll see it's pretty even. So that is what randint does. You can also, my other favorite thing to use with random, and I'm actually going to change how I'm importing it here. So like from random, I want to import called choice. Now, before I said random.randint and then did some stuff. This time I can just use choice as is. So I can just say choice. Create a list. So I have red, yellow, and green are my colors. And I'm going to colors. And I got yellow. If I run it again, I get yellow again. By the way, when this happens in kid classes, when I get the same number 2 times in a row, they're like, "You're lying. Random doesn't work." And I'm like, "No, this is right now where I'd start dying." Okay, so it'll basically give you a random item from that list, which is just amazingly useful when you remember that it exists, especially if you do things like games or raffles or things like that. I actually, whenever I'm in a group of Python people, and we have to do a raffle, we'll actually pull up, this and do the code and say, okay, here's all the people that are in it. We can see the list is legit, and we run choice, and then ta-da, that's the winner, because we trust Python more than we trust, our friends. So that's choice. There's lots of other things you can do with random. You can get, a random float in between 0 and 1 not inclusive. There's just all kinds of stuff. If you want to do anything with any kind of randomization, then you need to sit down and read what random does. So the next one, oh, and by the way, just to show you real fast, like if I just go back to import random, this code won't work anymore. Let me show you. Choice is not defined because we would need to put, then it works. Random.choice. So the next thing that I want to show off is calendar. Actually, let me import pretty print real fast, show you pretty print. This is one of those things that it's just kind of useful to have around. It basically prints things and makes them look nice. So let's see, I don't have any questions yet. So let's say I have a dictionary. I'm going to make a dictionary of my pets real fast. So there's my pets. And when I run this, you were supposed to print that prettily. Maybe it doesn't work over here. Okay, I guess it doesn't work in idle. I'll look it up later. Every once in a while you run into something that does not work in idle the way you would expect it to. So let's go over another very important one that I highly recommend everyone check out besides random is datetime. Now random and datetime are dull as dirt, but I will guarantee you at some point you're going to need, even if you don't need random at any point, you're going to need datetime. You do not want to implement this one on your own. Trust me. I have watched people do this. It'll make you want to pull your hair out. So from you will find this pattern quite a bit in Python where they name, like the module is named datetime and the thing you want is also called datetime, like the same thing. You see this all the time. It's kind of annoying. But anyway, from datetime, import datetime, that's almost always what you will see. I see some people use import datetime. I just think it's like, we know it's datetime. We don't need to do that. So now equals datetime.now. print. Let's run this. Okay, so this returns basically what the time is now. So it's 2014, it's month 11, day 15, hour 11, it's 49:53, and then microseconds for super precision. Now, that's just printing it out, because when you print out datetime, it gives you a nice string out. This is what we're actually working with. We're working with something called a datetime object, which you can think of an object as, a bucket filled with information that we just kind of want to keep all together. So here, datetime.now, the first thing is the year. Then we have, the month and all that. And why do we have that? Because we can access all of those separately. So let's get that. And I'm just going to save this to N. So N is holding whatever was spit back when we called datetime now. See, there it is. And if I do N year, we get 2014. And month, we get 11. We can also create datetime objects. So let's say birthday equals datetime, where the year is equal to 2008. The day is equal to the 9th, the month. So that's my daughter's birthday. So if we say, we can actually do some math. So now minus B-Day, I think that's the order. And actually, I'm just curious, B-Day minus now. Yeah, the first one is correct. So the time between now and the birthday, well, we've got this thing called a time delta. Basically means the difference in time. So we'll save D equals now minus the birthday. What kind of things? Well, we have how many days? Well, there's 2,502 days. Okay, yeah, I see what it's doing. So you can see basically using the time delta, like how many days have passed. Max, min, microseconds, seconds, how many seconds have passed, that kind of stuff. So that can be useful, and you'll often use that if you need to say, like, if you ever look on like a web page, like this happened a month ago, a day ago, that kind of thing. So I recommend really strongly sitting down and at the very least looking at datetime and really learning what datetime can do for you, because seriously, you don't want to do this on your own. Calendars are hard. It's taken us quite a while to figure them out. Now, speaking of calendars, one of my favorite ones is calendar. So import silly one. It has some interesting information in it, but I mostly like it for this. Print calendar dot p, I think it's here. Okay, so it's calendar PR month. I think that, let's see, 2014 11 is what we need to give it. And it printed out a calendar. This is actually a funny one that I use in the kids code class when I'm teaching, when Barbara and I are teaching these classes. I will say, hey, figure out what day of the week you were born by, doing calendar and then PR month, and then the year you were born, and then the month you were born, and tell me what day of the week you were born. Let me go look. And yeah, this is how you figure out totally who the parents are that were lying when they said their kids were 12, which happens every time. So I was born on a Tuesday, which is hilarious. My mother always gets this wrong. She swears I was born on a Wednesday. And I'm like, Mom, no. Calendar says Tuesday. So that's Calendar. It's kind of a funky little fun thing, especially if you use lots of terminals and startup. You can run, just have a little quick script that'll run like this month. Another one, let's see, we are at 11:54. Let's see, I think I'll skip turtles for now. Turtles is fun. Turtles, you basically draw turtles on a screen. Actually, let me open up let me see if I can find, oh, I have too many things. And I'm sorry for this really super tiny, like, text. It drives me insane too. I can't seem to make it bigger. Play with turtles. Spyro. Okay, this is Spyro. And it's basically basically with the turtle, it draws on the screen. So I'll run it. And say it's making a nice little spirograph. It's probably lagging for all of you. But if you ever played with Logo when you were a kid, yeah, that's basically it. Logo, turtles, that kind of stuff. So if you want to learn more about modules, and I highly recommend sitting down and just looking over the list of modules, there's two places you can go. First, well, there's Doug Hellman's book. There's Doug Hellman's book. You can go and buy it, and it's awesome and great, and it's a great reference to have on your desk. You can also throw it at intruders and kill them. Otherwise, you also have his blog. Basically his Python module of a week was the blog that inspired this book. It was pretty much the book. So you can go here, which is PYMTOC2. I'm going to add this as a link in the showcase notes. Adding it, show it. Okay. So that's now in the showcase. So you should be able to pull that up. And you can go there and read about all of them. You can see what they do. He has lots of examples. There's also the official Python docs. Let's see. Which is a somewhat drier version of Doug's book with not as many examples, but a high view and some of the more sciencey discussion. So I'll add that as well. I personally, if I have a question about modules, I go hit Doug's blog first. So adding that. Okay, so that's where you can go to learn more. You can also use the help function. So if you do help calendar or help, first import it and then get the help. I don't know why some of these aren't working. It's probably just something weird with IPython, but you can use help, look at the documentation, that kind of stuff, because there are so many more. Now, there's also modules that you can go out and install, because while Python does come with quite a few, it doesn't come with everything. So you can go out and install more modules. This might want to be a little careful with this because there are ones that are preferred. So I would do a little research, or at the very least, pop into the Python chat room on Freenode and just ask, or ask one of us, what would be the best module for this. Earlier, somebody was asking about statistics, and there's lots of stats modules that you can find, but there are definitely ones that are better supported. Some examples of ones that you can install are SciPy, Pygame, Flask, Django. Trying to think of more. There are lots, basically like 90% of GitHub. So and that is so weird that calendar does not work for somebody. That is weird. Okay, so I'm just catching up on what's going on in chat. All right. So let's talk about what's next. I'm going to pull up the Q&A app. If you have anything like a specific module you want me to ask about, or like I want to do blah, as general as you want, ask now, because I can go over like, what are the best ones for this, what projects should you check out, that kind of thing. So what next? What are some of the things people often want to do? Well, often people want to do something like they want to do web dev. If you would like to do web development with Python, Python is great for that. And I'm going to say this a lot, that Python is great for that. Python is really great for web development because it's easy to work in. There are some really robust like web development frameworks you can use. Some of the ones that I recommend. For beginners, I love Flask. Now, that's not to say Flask is like a toy framework. It's not. It's just very simple. And it's simple on purpose. It's with a little bit of Python, you can actually just do so much. In fact, I will prove that to you right now. So I'm going to open up this, and I'm just going to let it take up the whole page. That's fine. This is a very simple Flask app that I wrote, and what it's doing is this. Come on, show. This is what it's doing. You can't see the URL very well here, but basically it has, I'm serving it, running a web server on my computer, saying what font I want to use and some text. So right now I'll say, so I'll say hello PyLadies, and I can change the font. It'll change it to whatever, it'll basically go out and get fonts off of Google Fonts. So if I change it to Lobster, it'll be in Lobster. This is a stupid, simple little thing that solved a problem that I had, a very small problem in which, I was like, when I'm doing these Hangouts, how do I leave a sign on my computer that says, we'll be back, without having to open up, another application, because I like to keep the number of applications small. And I thought, oh, I'll already have a browser open, so I'll just do this. And then, of course, everything got like out of hand, and I started saying, oh, I can add cool fonts to it. And basically, that's what it is. And let's go over the Flask thing. From Flask, I import Flask. I import something called render template. I do some magic here. This is just what you have to do. But each one of these is basically a URL. And I'm passing in data through the URL. So this one, ignore this one. This one doesn't do anything yet. But if it looks at the URL and says, aha, she has some text here and some text here in between these two like slashes, then I know that the first one is the font and the second one is some text. And I'm going to create a template, get a template, and stick some text in it and stick the font in it so that it knows how to render that font. If I just have the text, then I just send the text to it and it uses a default text. And if we go to the base of the site, then I just say, you have to give me something. So as you can see, you actually know most of these things. Like, you already know how to do a lot of these things already. So Flask is a great place to start because you don't need to know about like object-oriented programming or databases or optimization or anything. You can just start creating like little web pages. If you're interested in Flask, I'd recommend going to Invent with Python. Not Invent with Python. Python Anywhere, because they have a great Flask tutorial. Also, you all probably have heard of Django, or many of you have heard of Django. It's why we get a lot of people in the group, because they're like, hey, I want to learn Django because I want to do this web development stuff. Django is also great. In fact, oh, look, Lightweight Django just was put up by another PyLady, Julia Ellman. Great book, but there's also lots of wonderful tutorials. And we'll be doing a class, I promise, eventually, on Django. There's also, I think there's a local Django users group. Django is souped up Flask. It has more things that come with it, like user management and, permissions and things like that. It's more robust. I find Flask great for when you just want to do something simple, basic, don't need a database, or you wanted something very lightweight, or you're talking to another database that's not yours. Django is great for when you have your data, your database, and you want to like do some really heavy lifting. There's also Plone. Plone is like beyond Flask. It's basically a content management system out of the box. Works, and then you can use a bit of Python to extend it. So, and there you can go to plone.org to check that out. Game development. I love game development. There actually are games written in Python. Civ 4 had parts of it written in Python. Yes, hold on a sec. Answer my question. Can we get a copy of the code for this Flask example? Also the turtle one. I'll be writing a blog post for that, my silly little Flask thing, and I will totally like share that link with everyone. I'll write it next week. And yes, I will send out a link I will share the code for the turtle example. The Flask one will not work for you until you have a Flask installed. The turtle one will work out of the box. So, game development. You can develop games in Python. As I said, Civ 4 did some of it in Python. EVE Online is written in stackless Python. There are other examples out there. Those are the two big ones. And what I recommend is that if you're going to write games in Python or you're interested in it, check out Pygame. Let me pull it up. Pygame, in spite of the dorky site, it is a great module. And it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So it takes care of how to put screens up and how to get input from users. And, you know, it just takes care of a lot of the really annoying tasks. It has physics engines. It has 3D engines. You can work with other engines and Pygame. You can use it to do things that are extremely simple. I made a very simple roguelike, and I'm going to add this to the. I made a very simple roguelike with it. You can also, make pretty complex games. If there's also a challenge every year called Pi Week, where you basically create a game in a week. There's two things you can do with that. You can join and create a game, or you can totally go there and download the games that were submitted and learn from that code, because many times that's how we learn. That's how I learned how to do a lot of like music rendering stuff, is that I downloaded games that had a lot of music and checked it out and, figured out how they were doing it, because the documentation wasn't quite getting me there, and I wanted to see how they did exactly that thing. It's part of the beauty of being an open source when people share their code, is that it helps us learn from it. So let's see, sciencey stuff. If you want to do sciencey stuff, I highly recommend checking out SciPy. If you go to scipy.org, SciPy has lots of things in it. It can be a little bit of a bear to install. And it comes, we've actually had install fests where we've gone around and installed everything. So if you ever get stuck installing it, you're not alone. Go seek out somebody else who's already installed it and have them help you walk through it. Some of the core packages are NumPy, Matplotlib, IPython, SymPy, and Pandas, which do all different things. I don't do a lot of science stuff, so most of my knowledge from it comes from talking to other sciencey people who do things like statistics, actually rendering graphs, dealing with, much more complex random things where random is not doing it for them, doing equations, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in sciencey stuff, I highly recommend checking out SciPy. They also have their own conference, I believe. SciPy conference? Yes. They have a SciPy conference. They have many of them. And it looks like the one in 2015 is going to be in Austin, Texas. So not terribly far. So let's see. And I'm going to go pull up the Q&A app real fast just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. Databases. If you work in databases and you want to use Python, there are many ways to talk to said databases. Like if you're just interested in having your own database of like information, and you're not too picky, you can use just out of the box. Python will work with SQLite. And I love SQLite. I have a real soft spot for it because it's a very simple database. It's very lightweight. You don't need to worry about what port it's running on or is the service up or whatever. It just sits there and it waits for you to ask it for information. I love SQLite. And SQLite is actually used, I know for fact, it's used on Android phones. Whenever data is stored in an Android phone, it's usually stored in SQLite. I believe it's used on iOS, but don't quote me. And if it's on iOS, it's using a very similar one. But if you don't want to use SQLite or you don't have a choice about the database you're talking to, there's also SQL Alchemy, which can help simplify. So you can write Python that will talk to a database. As long as you have the permissions to talk to that database, then you can run a Python script that can go and grab information. This sounds kind of dull, but this actually got me an award at work. Because I had to do these reports where I had to say what had been going on that week and for all of our tickets, like who touched what moved where. And it took me like 4 hours every Monday just to look at every single ticket in like 4 releases and say what was happening. So I wrote a script. And this is how most programming happens. I wrote a script to get me those numbers, and then I'd look at the numbers and I'd write the email. And so I basically queried the database directly and then got the numbers and then wrote the email around those. Well, after a while, I was like, might as well have the script write the email for me. So it would go and it would insert everything in natural language manner, and it would then output that text, and I'd copy and paste that into an email. And it's like, whoop, that's, one less thing I have to do. And then I thought, well, I hate having to remember to send that email at like 10 o'clock because if it's not in by 10, I get it 10:15, I get a nasty email. I should just have the script email it for me. So eventually it just turned into a cron job, which is a job that runs on a period basis, like a regular basis, that I would just run it and send it. And I never actually told my boss that it was a script because, hey, I got 4 hours back that were just mine. And I got an award because I had like all this useful information that I kept, like giving to her. So it was great. So basically you can do some really nice stuff that gets you money. Databases. I mentioned earlier smartphones. Smartphones, you can't use Python directly on a smartphone. Not yet. I mean, maybe soon, maybe one day, but not yet. That if you want to program directly to a smartphone, you have to learn either Java or Objective-C or whatever Microsoft OS is using, but nobody uses that phone. However, there is an app out there. There is a framework called Kivy. Kivy's great. Kivy's still in development. I mean, it has hit like a 1.0 status. They're still like working with it and making it better and better, but it's basically a way to make beautiful apps that work on both iOS and Android, and you write it using Python. Now, I'll warn you, this isn't like Flask, where Flask is like, I added 4 lines to my code and blah, now I have web pages. You have to think in a Kivy way when you program this. So that's why I generally caution people this is not necessarily for beginners. I'd recommend getting used to something like Flask or Django or a Pygame or something else before you dive into Kivy, because it is more advanced, because poor little phones don't have that much memory, don't have that much power. No matter how powerful they are, they're really not that powerful. So you need to be much more careful in how you work with phones. So that's why this is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more complicated. But now you know it's there. So if you want to do like app development, then you can always aim towards that. There's also just doing web development and creating web apps. That's your other option. But Kivy is actually creating like the code that will run, which allows you to do things like games. As you can see, lots of games flashing up here. So that is the end of my class. Are there any questions? I'm going to pull up the chat now. Oh, threading is like kind of an advanced topic. If you are interested in threading, threading is basically running more than one process at once. There's a few things you should check out. Stackless Python is really cool if you want to talk about threading. Stackless Python is what EVE Online is written in. EVE Online has the largest, what is it, universe that exists all at once. So there are not like, it's not like most MMOs where you go and you're like, you log into this server, this server. No, it has one universe that everybody is in, and it's huge, and it's run on Stackless Python. You can find talks from the EVE Online guys. Look for CCP, and they talk at PyCons. I haven't seen recently them talking there, but they have talked at many PyCons, and they blog about stuff and things like that. And so yeah, check that out. And there's other things about threading, but that's the one that always pops to my mind. That's like, oh, this one's really cool. So yes, databases. I hope I covered enough for you, Sarah Waterfall. Do I plan to have another class next month? I'm glad you asked. Why, yes. Let me pull up the meetup. You'll see my super secret. This is what it looks like to me. DC PyLadies. Where are my? No, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to look at drafts. Aha, here's the drafts. The one I'm planning, the PJ class for next month is Flask. So learning Flask. That's the one I'm planning on doing next month. And if you have learned whatever you've learned today, that is, you know, what you'll need to know next month. So that is how easy Flask is. So, let's see. So yeah, that'll be the one for next month. So as long as you know how to write a function, and we'll go over HTML, you know, some very basic HTML. You're not going to be making, you know, anything too complicated, but we'll go over some basic HTML. So all you really need to know is how to like do some basic stuff in Python, and we can get you up and running with Flask. And Kivy is very cool. It's getting cooler by the minute. They're very, if you follow them on GitHub, you will get so spammed on GitHub, like of all the things they're doing. I'm especially excited for what they'll be like a year from now. Do I have any recommendations for beginners? Well, I have to plug here, my editor will kill me. So I wrote a book. This is my book, Python and, you know, Teach Yourself Python in 24 Hours. It's a teach yourself book. Don't judge it because of that. It's in Python too, and it basically runs through the very beginning stuff all the way up to coding in Flask and Pygame and doing object-oriented design and getting help and contributing to the Python community, that kind of stuff. For basic projects to work on, this one actually has like projects as you go along. Let's see. For basic projects, one thing I would always recommend users to start with is to think of something that annoys you, that you can have automated away, or something that, you know, you would like to, you know, not have to do anymore, and work with somebody else, you know, work with a mentor that can point you in the right direction. Because at the beginning, it can feel like, I don't know how to do anything, and it can feel a little difficult. Oh, some other good books for beginning Python. I'm now blanking out on all of them. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Learn Python the hard way is also great, and it's not that hard. It is. It's actually, what's great about it is that it teaches you to write code in a way that will not drive you insane later, which is good. So that is another one I would check out. Oh, thank you. So let's see, what was Tammy? Yeah, and basic projects, it kind of depends on what you want to do as well. So I think we should probably work on that, is having a list of like basic projects. There was one that Lynn Root put out there, but it's a little more advanced than what this class covered, because it's like, you know, pushing into like talking to Google APIs and things like that. Yep, Hear Me Code. There's also, if you go to, oh, another one that Invent with Python. Now, Invent with Python was written for kids. It's written for kids, but it does have projects in it that you can play around with. There's just invent your own computer games with Python and Pygame, but it really goes through a lot of basic stuff and has games that are kind of fun to write and play. And it keeps the language simple, which can be a problem with some beginner books, is that they use advanced computer science language that not all of us are familiar with. And there's also the hacking one, encrypt messages and hack ciphers, which is fun. And Laura, trust me, there are times, the more I code, the more I think, God, I don't know how to do anything. But a lot of it's just habit. And one day I remember that I was like, I'm a beginner. I don't know how to do anything. And somebody was like, wow, you did this great thing. That's so neat. I love it. And I'm like, oh my God, I actually know how to do useful things. And it's one day, you just wake up and you're like, I know how to do all these useful and awesome and cool things. And, it's more of a realization. So it looks like we're tentatively doing a Pandas class. I'm assuming the Pandas class is in person. Mine will be online only. So it'll be another thing like this. If you have any recommendations or anything that could have gone more smoothly or things that you would enjoy, please let us know. I'm tentatively doing an SQLite and Python in your PJs in January. So if there's anything else in your PJs, line that you would like to see, because I enjoyed doing this. This was a lot of fun. And I didn't have to go into DC and pay for parking. Yay! But I didn't get to go to Sephora, so boo. Sure, I will open. Actually, you know what? Let me see. Do I actually have the text up for the Flask one that makes sense? Yeah, it's on the 13th, so I'm going to open that now. There. And I'll announce it now. There you go. Yes, and Pandas is one of those things we would probably want to do in person because there's a lot of over-the-shoulder looking, is this installed correctly, that kind of stuff. So, oh, thank you. So if anybody does have any questions, now is the time because there is 8 minutes before I close this broadcast. Sephora is awesome. Shush. Sephora is the best. That's what gets my butt into DC sometimes that early, because I know I can go to Sephora afterwards. Yeah, I may have to treat myself to an Ulta trip later. But also feel free on the DC Pilates class page to ask for other classes. And I will try to and I will try to accommodate if, don't ask, if you ask me about Kivy, I'm just getting used to Kivy, off and on. Oh, thank you, Annalie. And yes, Sephora does take all your money. Yeah, paying for parking in DC is like, whew. Or remembering to actually when you're parked on your phone, yeah, remembering to up that. So Jackie, when is the Pandas class? Yes, use the suggestions tab. We have that? Oh yes, that's right. If you go to DC Pilates and you click on suggested, which is right here, go ahead and you can suggest here. Now don't be insulted if I'm like, no, because sometimes Django, everybody asks for Django. And Django is one of those things that it can take a bit longer to teach. And sometimes it's hard to coordinate our schedules so that we have enough teachers. Now I have run across a class that is basically like an evening class or a bunch of individual classes. So that one we can talk about doing in the spring as an In Your PJs series, but it would be, I will warn you, it's going to be a longer class because it's not something you can always get done in a 3 to 4 hour like stretch. Flask is mainly used for web development, yes. You could probably use it, I mean, you could probably use it to serve JSON. I know saw somebody mention that earlier because Python comes with a way to deal with JSON. So you could basically, create the JSON and then spit it out using Flask. I do that. I'll do that often if I just need to spit out some information. Yay, already people going to the Flask class. The Flask tutorial, let's see. Home. Upcoming. There is the link to the Flask. A link to the Flask class. How can we volunteer to help you with your classes in the future? Feel free to message us through the PyLadies app, or not, the Meetup. If you go to the Meetup, you can usually ping us, like email the organizers. We're always looking for volunteers, and usually we like to ask, like, okay, what's your level? Like, we don't have trouble finding space, but we have trouble, like, what's your level? Are you an expert, Django developer, Python developer? Just, how can you help? Even having people who know what they're doing in these chats like this help quite a bit. And even like when we're doing install fests, what we need? We need more people who know how to install Python on Windows. Looking at you, Jackie, because I'm like the one person who knows how to install Python on Windows. And so if you're somebody who knows how to do that, I will always need your help during install fests. Oh, the thing that was just linked, the Mega Flask tutorial is awesome. And I personally, I love it. That's actually how I got into Flask. Another good one, if you go to Python Anywhere, go to Python Anywhere, and here I'm already like signed in, but one thing you can do is if you create a Flask app, and by the way, Python Anywhere is free, so you can just do it. One of the things you can do is it'll walk you through a tutorial that'll say, hey, go here, do this, enter this code, do this, and it'll move you through the different parts. And you learn Python Anywhere, but you also learn Flask. It's really great. I highly recommend it. That was the second way I learned how to do Flask, was I ran through their tutorial really quickly. I just saw Jackie's comment giving me the stink eye. So, and the advantage of the Python Anywhere thing is at the end of the tutorial, you have a working Flask site. So it's great. And you can do quite a, like, I'm just killing these, I don't need them. But yeah, it's a great place to learn, to practice Python, because you can also just share things out. And you can like share consoles with other people. So if you're having issues. Oh, and you can sync it with Dropbox. As you can see, I'm a big Python Anywhere fan. And look, we already have 19 people. Yay! Okay, it is 12:29, so no questions. So, one more. For folks who haven't coded before who want to continue with Python, MIT, that is a really good class too. And sometimes don't feel weird like, okay, I took my beginner's class, I can never take a beginner's class again. Take multiple, because we're all going to explain things in a slightly different way, and it'll give you a more cohesive like knowledge base. So, go back and take another, take the introduction courses again. So yeah, definitely the MIT one is a really great website, a really great one to go with. And it's always fun when you have an end product at the end. I'm going to add that link. I'm going to add that to the showcase. Come on. There you go. And with that, it is 12:30. So thank you all for coming and watching my attending my class. And if you have any suggestions, feel free to send it to me via the DC PyLadies class. And I hope to see many of you, if not all of you, next month for Flask in Your PJs. Bye.